Hello, my name is Scott Van Arsdale, and welcome to the third segment of my Eagle presentation here. As I mentioned before, I was a wildlife technician with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation for decades, and a big part of my duty was working with eagles. I apologize. This is during the Great Isolation of 2020 with the COVID-19 virus, and I am giving this from home, and you probably just heard my dog here. I do have an audience of one. I apologize for any disruptions that happen because I am doing this from home. The phone rings, and my wife is here. She's an adjunct professor at SUNY Oneonta, and she is doing her classes remotely online in another room, but there may be some disruptions. And I also apologize. I realize from the other segments with this PowerPoint presentation, for some reason when I change the slides, the volume increases a whole bunch. So that could be real annoying with your volume control, especially for using earbuds or headphones. I apologize about that. My technical abilities with this digital stuff is really just enough to get me in trouble and not to give you a real select presentation here. But today we are going to be dealing with capture attempts on eagles, which was very rewarding at times, could be very frustrating. It's always a whole lot of work, and I'll be talking about that here and the reasons why we did it during this presentation. Unfortunately for me, in the earlier years of my eagle career, almost all of the eagle trapping in the state occurred down in Sullivan County along the Delaware River, which is in Region 3, and I was a Region 4 employee. And Pete had seasonal staff. Pete and I, my eagle mentor, had seasonal staff down there that managed the bait sites for him, kept the bait out in a watch out, so when desirable eagles were coming into the bait, they would get in touch with Pete, and Pete would come down from the Albany area early in the morning and trap with those folks. Usually, the trapping was just a two-person job at minimum. In fact, I know one biologist who does golden eagles who works alone sometimes, but that's really quite a feat. You really have to know what you're doing. And actually, one of the DEC trappers up in the North Country, Blanche Town, who I worked with late in my career a little bit and will be in this presentation, would trap eagles on the St. Lawrence by herself, but then she would meet up with Pete to process the bird, so two people were processing the bird. But even that alone, what Blanche was doing was quite remarkable, and hats off to her for that. But it's generally a two-person job. Sometimes there'd be more people involved, and the way it was generally done in an area where you would expect to find the eagles, the staff would get roadkill deer carcasses from DOT, check them over to make sure there's no indication they had been shot with lead bullets, because lead is toxic to eagles, as we'll talk about in the next segment. And they would put the bait out at the trap site along with a dummy net box, which would look very similar to this real net box in the foreground of the picture here, and get the birds used to coming into the bait, frequenting the bait, and then on trap day, hopefully they would come in none the wiser and be caught. The preferred technique, the most effective technique we used on bald eagles was the rocket net. In this picture here, the rocket net has already been fired, and there are two eagles under the net, one on the left, one on the right, and that pile in the center there is actually the bait, the dead deer. And what these nets are, you can see the angle irons on top of the box, and the rockets would go on that. The rockets are basically, they were made out of steel. Each one weighed 10 pounds, pretty big things. And they were charged with solid rocket fuel charges, which were detonated by a black powder charge electronically. You can see that antenna thing sticking up in the front there, that's actually a receiver, like a radio control receiver like you'd have for a model airplane or similar. So you get this whole thing set up in the dark in the morning before it started getting light out, because as soon as it gets light out, the eagles can become active and want to fill their crops. So you get everything set, wired up to the battery, and go back to the blind, which in most cases for the bald eagle trapping here was in a vehicle parked maybe several hundred yards to a quarter mile away, and you would use the binoculars and spotting scopes to watch the trap site and judge when when the proper birds were there, if everybody was safe, everybody had their head down. So when things were just right, you throw the switch. The rocket, the black powder would be detonators would be ignited. That would set off the solid rocket fuel. The 3 rockets in this case would launch out, pulling the net over the bait and the eagles. And if all went well, you had some work to do after that, processing eagles. What we were usually doing in these attempts, we were trying to get transmitters on desirable eagles. I'll explain more about what a desirable eagle was here in a little bit. So we could learn about eagle movements. Certain eagles that weren't targeted, or were just incidental catches or whatever. We might not put the transmitter on them. We might just put the leg bands on them so they could be identified later. But there was always a reason for this. We weren't doing this for kicks and grins. We're always trying to gather data for a purpose. Here's another shot of a net deployed, a little better shot. Good spread on the net there. That's what you want. Sometimes they don't always spread that well and could cause problems, but in this case there's one eagle, which is that black dot to the right of the bait on the left under the net there. A successful shot. Eagle was caught and was ready to be processed. This is not an eagle. I'm going to back up a little bit here. I mentioned that traditionally most of the bald eagle trapping occurred down in Sullivan County, and I didn't get to play much because that was out of my region. Sullivan County is in Region 3. I was a Region 4 employee. But later on in my career, we did do some bald eagle trapping for several years in my region, and I got involved with it. But before that happened, I had a lot of rocket netting experience from my other duties. I learned how to use a rocket net in Region 8 when I was a seasonal, working out near the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge and a couple of the state management areas that surrounded it. Staff there and I would go out, and I think I mentioned in a previous presentation, we would rocket net geese to band them and put net collars on them for identification. And then later on in Region 4, I was the main rocket net guy for turkey trapping and goose trapping in Region 4. Caught a lot of birds that way. So I was already, by the time I worked on eagles, I was already experienced using a rocket net. You really want to know what you're doing because they're very dangerous, both for humans and for the birds. In fact, after 9/11, we had to get all kinds of special explosive licensing and all kinds of rules and regulations for handling the rocket charges and things. But anyway, so when fellow office worker, a fellow from fisheries, came to me one year late in the deer season and said that the farm he hunted on, about a half hour from the office, had golden eagles showing up frequently, like very regularly, a pair of golden eagles. So I called Pete up and asked him if he wanted me to try to capture them, and he said, sure, go for it. So I drove down to the farm and met with the family who ran the farm there. Great people. Really, it was great getting to know them, and they helped in every way they could throughout this whole project. And they gave me the green light, and I put a deer carcass out within view of their farm office on a hillside in a field. in a pre-baiting, to pre-bait the site. And I just got back to the office, got to my desk, and the phone rang, and it was one of the farmers telling me there was a golden eagle on the bait as he spoke. So I hopped right back in the vehicle and drove back to the farm, and I got there in time to see the golden eagle chewing on the deer carcass that I put out. And what a beautiful sight. It was a bright sunny day, and a golden eagle in the bright sunshine, those gold feathers on the head they just glow in the bright sunshine. It was a beautiful sight, and I thought this was going to be real easy. It was going to be a slam dunk. Well, throughout the winter, I try to find days that fit my schedule and Peter's schedule. I had never put a transmitter on a bird. I wasn't licensed to do it, and so I had to pick days when I didn't have other duties that were going to interfere with it, when the weather was conducive to doing it, and Pete was going to be available if I should get lucky and catch an eagle, so he could put the transmitter on the bird. So this was the winter of, I believe, 2002, 2003, and that year there were so many mornings that were below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Just about every morning, I think of the 12 mornings I went out trying to catch eagles, 11 were below 0. Real cold, and we had a lot of frustrations. We'd go out, I wouldn't see an eagle all day before sunrise until sunset. I wouldn't see an eagle all day, and then I'd have to be doing something else the next day, and the farmers would call me up and tell me, oh, you got a golden eagle on the bait. And this went on. Finally, it dawned on me that if I was going to be successful, I was just going to have to keep going every day until we caught a bird. And turns out, I found out later in my career, if you can do it, that's the most effective way to do it. But like I said, in the DEC, we all had other duties, and there's weather that wasn't conducive to that, so we couldn't always do that, be out there every day. But finally, Pete lent me his technician from Sullivan County, who was baiting the sites down there and had done extensive bald eagle trapping with Pete with a rocket net. Kathy Michelle, another Kathy. It seems like 3/4 of the people I worked with on the Eagle program were named Kathy. But Kathy was really good, and we ended up spending a lot of time together, getting to know each other while we were waiting for a golden eagle to come in. By this time, the farmers told me that on their hilltop, they had a hunting cabin up there with a wood stove, and it was at the edge of a field, so Kathy and I were using that. The farmers even lent us a snowmobile with heated handlebars to get up there every morning, which we did. And we set up the bait so we could see it from the window in the hunting cabin, and we stayed warm by the wood stove, and we just talked for hours and hours. After maybe about the 3rd or 4th day, it was late in the day, a bird showed up on the bait. This bird here in the picture. And Kathy and I were delirious from lack of sleep. For her, it was quite a distance from her house. She had to get up at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was getting up at about 3 o'clock in the morning so we could get out here, get up to the site, get the net set up and everything before daylight. So we were barely awake when this thing showed up. And in addition to that, the bait just happened to be right on the skyline where the field was like on a hill. And so the bait was right on the edge of where the field met the sky. It was right on the horizon. And this bird showed up, and I looked at it, and I said, it's an immature golden eagle. Look at that. Which, mind you, by this time, I'd probably seen one golden eagle in my life out in the wild as it flew by, and the several that had showed up on the bait, that I'd already mentioned before. Actually, it was a pair, so it was 1 or 2 on the bait. I guess what I'm trying to say is I wasn't an experienced golden eagle viewer. Sorry for that long explanation. But anyway, this tail looked just like the tail of an immature golden eagle, and then that white on the head there looked like the gold on the head. And the bird was skyline, so I really couldn't judge the size. The body was dark. It's got to be a golden eagle. What else would it be? And Kathy goes, are you sure that's a golden eagle? I go, yeah, what else would it be? So it got into the rhythm of feeding, the rhythm we wanted, and when it's There were no other birds around. It was going to be a safe shot. We weren't going to bonk anybody on the head with the rockets or anything like that. It put its head down. I was looking through the optics, and Kathy had the detonator. I told her to throw the switch. When the head was down, she threw the switch. The rockets went off. It was under the net. We caught it. Yay! Oh, Kathy and I raced out the door and raced up to the net, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This bird was much too small to be a golden eagle. In fact, what we're looking at is a rough-legged hawk, which are visitors to upstate New York in the wintertime, just like the golden eagles are. And so I got fooled, and we couldn't help but laugh, but we were also very frustrated because we thought after all these days of trapping, we finally had a golden eagle. Not to be. However, the next time we went out, I was a little more wiser on what to look for in a bird on the target, and we did catch a golden eagle finally. This was the 12th day of trapping that winter, all to catch one golden eagle, and it's in the crate there. That's one of those crates that were used during the bald eagle hacking program, and we're getting ready to take the bird down to the road and drive it up to Cobleskill, which was about 45 minutes away. SUNY Cobleskill, I had arranged to meet Pete there, and we asked the professor to keep it quiet. We don't want to, cause too much commotion. We don't want a huge audience when we do this. Well, they couldn't contain their excitement, and when we got there was a crowd. But we processed the bird anyway, and I got some pictures of that processing here. That's Pete and I on the right, me on the left, and Kathy Michelle in the background there. And Kathy is a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, which turned out to be very fortuitous here, as I'll show you in the next slide. When Kathy and I got to the net, and we saw this time it was a golden eagle. It wasn't a roughleg. We noticed that on one foot, all of its talons were missing, except for the hallux talon, the rear talon. It was an old injury. It wasn't even scarred. The flesh had healed over the wounds, but still, this was a compromised eagle. And so we were a little concerned about that, but hey, the bird was out and about and feeding, so let's go ahead and process it. Well, unfortunately, while it was in the crate on the way to the college here for the processing, that hallux talon, which is the rear talon, you can see on the near foot there, it's that rear talon that is looping up and around there. That pulled off in the crate, the last one on the right foot there. And it's kind of like if you've ever cut a dog's toenail too close, it bleeds profusely. So when we opened up the crate, there's just blood everywhere, and it was really scary. But Kathy, being the wildlife rehabilitator she is, she had that proper powder. I forget the name of it. That staunches, clots the blood flow, and she got the bleeding stopped immediately. We assessed the bird. He seemed to be doing fine, and so Pete went ahead with the transmitter attachment. You also notice the hood on the bird. We always do that with all the eagles, because if they can't see anything, they calm right down. And surprisingly, with whole golden eagles, I learned later on, and we're going to cover a bunch of golden eagle trapping here in a bit. The golden eagles in the wild are the dominant bird. The bald eagles defer to them. The ravens defer to them. Everybody defers to them. They're the king of the carcass when they show up. Everybody respects them. But when you handle them, every bird is different. But the golden eagles they'll struggle, and they might vocalize for just a few seconds, and then they just give right up and turn to jello. Bald eagles in hand tend to be a lot snottier, a lot friskier, and they're trying to relieve you of some blood every moment until you get that hood on. So the golden eagles are totally different. Interesting traits there. But anyway, with this one, we went ahead and processed it. Turns out this bird was used to all that cold from that very cold winter, and it was starting to really show some signs of being stressed out from the heat, being inside. So we took it outside to finish the processing. This is a very small golden eagle. Like bald eagles, the male golden eagles tend to be smaller than the females. Females can be quite large. For the most part, the very biggest female bald eagles will be bigger than the biggest golden eagles, but it can be really close. There have been some big female golden eagles caught. Whoops, I got ahead of myself there. Anyway, we got the transmitter on that bird and banded it. Its band was A00. The color assigned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to New York State for golden eagles is black. And so we put A00 on one foot and the silver band, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band, on the other. And A00's transmitter lasted, I don't know what went on with my program here. I had to map away where A00 went. That's why I'm surprised that we're looking at this slide here. Okay, well, sorry about the confusion here. But A00, I caught it, I think around March 10th that year, and just a few days later, the first warm weather of spring and associated south winds with the spring weather appeared, and A00 took advantage of them, and in one day was right up near the Canadian border, leaving this farm in Delaware County, in the Delhi area, if you're familiar with the topography and geography of New York State. And it just rode the wind currents up north and ended up wintering right on near the border of Labrador and Quebec. And then we tracked it back in the fall and got data as it migrated. It spent its whole winter back in the same general vicinity of where I caught it the next winter. Went back up north, and then the transmitter died. But a few years later, during deer season, one of the farmers was out hunting, and he saw a golden eagle, and he put his scope on it, his rifle scope on it, and saw the transmitter. So A00 survived. And another interesting story, the farmers told me they observed the pair cooperatively hunting. At this time, Delaware County was loaded with wild turkeys. They were just everywhere. And they tend, in the wintertime, they congregate near the farms because they like to pick the grain out of the spread manure. And this farm was no different. It had a fairly sizable flock of wild turkeys, and we're pretty sure that's why the golden eagles were hanging around. And the farmers, one day, they observed the golden eagles showed up while the turkeys were out in the field. The turkeys ran for a brushy area and all ran into the brush. And A00, the debilitated one, walked into the brush and drove them out, and its partner there, the other bird, the healthier bird, the female, grabbed the turkey, and they both fed on the turkey carcass. So interesting stuff there. But anyway, that was, I got to do a little more trapping here and there, just incidentally, kind of as a fill-in down at the Sullivan County site. But then Peter planned to launch a 3-year study on the upper Delaware River system, part of which is in my region, Region 4. So he had me, the year before that was supposed to start in earnest, he had me come down while he and Kathy were trapping at the site in Sullivan County, so I could get a little experience trapping the bald eagles. And that's when this picture was taken here with a big female we caught, which happened to, with this transmitter, we learned she nested up above Lake Superior in western Ontario. So she'd travel all the way from there down to New York State to winter, and then all the way back up north of Lake Superior in western Ontario to nest. Okay, here I am holding her for another photo op, and people always ask me, aren't you afraid they're going to tear you apart? And if you notice how I'm holding it, I'm holding the two legs together, pinning them together with the one hand. That's neutralizing the talons. They're the big thing you have to really worry about. Pete one time was processing a bird, and an inexperienced person was holding it, and they let go of a foot, and the eagle sank its talons into Pete's arm. And I guess it took 3 people to to pry them out. These birds, when they lock their talons, are really, really strong. And so that's how we hold them, and that keeps the talons from being much of a problem. But if you also notice, I'm holding the bird away from my face, so it can't bite my face. They will bite you if they can. Not as serious as a talon injury, of course, unless they got you in the eye, but we hold them so they can't do much damage. But in spite of all that, I think they have a sense that we're doing all this for their benefit, and they're really not going to try to hurt us. They wouldn't try to hurt us. Just kidding, of course. This bird decided to make an attempt and got my scarf there. And I look terrified, but I'm hamming it up. I know I'm safe. So one of the reasons for me being there is so I could learn how to transmitter a bird. It's also part of the federal licensing. You actually have to have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service license to capture, band, telemeter, take blood, whatever you're going to do. As I'm going to explain later when I talk about the golden eagles, they just, every little activity. At this time, I don't know how strict the licensing was. I didn't do anything with it. Pete handled it all. After Pete retired, I had to get involved with that golden eagle project and had to do some of the licensing. And I trained a couple other staff to help them get licensed. And they really toughened it up. They don't. I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say here, other than it's not real easy anymore to get licensed to do this eagle work. But here I am learning it. Kathy's holding the bird while I'm putting the transmitter on, while Pete's taking the picture and coaching me on how to attach a transmitter. Here's one of the transmitters. At this time, the transmitters were they were set to take locations of the birds, coordinates, GPS coordinates, at certain times of the day, however they were set for. And then when the satellite that they were communicating with was directly overhead, they would download the data to the satellite, and then we could retrieve the data on our desktops, computer desktops. This is a huge advance over the early VHF transmitters, which are basically a FM radio station on the eagle's back, which we could follow the birds locally, but it was tough, to study migrating birds this way. Although I will tell a story really quick. Lois Goblet, who was working with Pete before I came along, she went on to other things before I even started working for the department. But early on in the eagle studies, they got one of those VHF transmitters on a migrating bird, and they actually hadn't tried to follow it with an aircraft, with a small plane up into Canada, which is really quite a feat. It would be so easy to lose a signal, and they managed to track this bird all the way up to its summering grounds in Quebec, I believe it was. That was quite a feat. Normally you couldn't do that. These new style transmitters just made getting that kind of data so much easier and so much more effective. And if you notice, this particular unit here has a solar charging panel on it, and that greatly extended the life of some of these transmitters. The one I put on A00, the Golden Eagle, did not have that, and the transmitter, I think, was designed to last about 18 months. When they started doing the solar backup here, we could get hopefully get 5 years on a transmitter, 5 years worth of data. So jump forward, I'm going to get ahead of myself just a little bit here. I'll show you a picture in a minute of them. The ones we were using on the golden eagles and the bald eagles towards the end of my career, actually they're GPS units that connect to the cell network. So they're actually cheaper to use. And the initial cost is expensive, like this version of the transmitter being shown, but you don't have the satellite subscription fees, which can run about $1,000 a year. You just need a little cell plan to get the data. So technology moves forward in wildlife studies and allows more flexibility and greater in-depth data gathering. The whole idea for me being out there with Kathy and Pete was to get enough experience and license so I could go out with my own crew in my own region and catch, birds in my region while Pete and Kathy caught the birds down in Region 3. And here this is after the shot. I'm working with the other Kathy, Kathy Maloney, who was my right-hand man. She's not a man. She wasn't a man, obviously, but she was a great help throughout a lot of the eagle work over the years. And in this shot, we have two immatures, the one in the far part of the net there, and the one just in the foreground and in front of the bait. Those are two immature birds still under the net, and we caught an adult bird, which is the target bird that's already in the hacking crate there. And there it is in the crate. Not looking too happy, but whatever. I think that's such a cool shot. Taken by the landowner's daughter, by the way. There's Kathy with one of the immatures. We weren't putting the transmitters on the immatures. We just fit them with leg bands and sent them on their way. This was the adult we caught that day, and we didn't see it from the vehicle. Our blind is in the vehicle. If you go down that laneway through the field behind Kathy's left shoulder, it goes up to a paved road, and then we were in the state vehicle to the right of the picture, a good 1,200 feet away probably, to watch what was going on at the bait through optics, and we didn't notice that this bird had the New York State blue band on it already. And if you look really closely, you can see a little bit, just a tiny bit of dark feathers in the head and tail of this bird. So she was just turning 5. So our targets are what we wanted for this first year of the study. We wanted to get migrating birds. We were hoping to catch Canadian birds so we could study their migration movements. And since we knew this was a New York bird, we put one of the local VHF transmitters on it so we could track it locally. I'm sure most of you have probably seen this kind of telemetry on TV where people have an antenna in their hand and they're trying to find wildlife or their dogs, their hunting dogs, things like that. That's the type of equipment we were using on this bird. It was a good thing we did, because she took us to her nest. Through the telemetry, we found her nest, which we may not have found without it, very close to the trap site here. And for those of my friends who are going to see this, who are involved in the Atlatl community, who know Ray Turner, or if you've seen Ray on Filthy Riches, he's the eel man on Filthy Riches, and we will have him on my presentation here in a little bit. This is that nest which was near his house, and during the big event we have at his place every summer, this bird would show up. For the first couple of years, I had the telemetry equipment, and I knew she was nearby, and we'd get the scopes out and everything, and she didn't disappoint when she showed up and we got to view her. And since then, the nest has moved very close to Ray. I'm not going to tell you exactly where, but this bird now is really a close neighbor and friend of Ray Turner's. So cool stuff there. Here's another shot we took that year. This was another story in itself. True to form, Kathy and I showed up while it was still dark in the morning, and we got the net all set up and everything was good to go, and we got back to the vehicle and set up. Turned out to be a very long day. This bird here in my hand did show up at first light. We got the net set up in time. The bird showed up and perched in a tree near the bait and just stayed there until another eagle showed up and he chased it away. Then he just went back to the tree and stayed there. Another eagle would show up and he would chase it away and then just go back to the tree. And this just went on all day long. He wouldn't come to the bait, and he wouldn't let any other eagle come to the bait. Finally, after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he flew from the tree down to the ground a good 100 yards from the bait. and just started walking very slowly towards the deer carcass and the net set up. And we're going, come on, it's going to get dark. We're not going to, we're getting antsy here. We've been sitting in the car all day. And finally, he got to the deer, and no lie, he stuck out his foot and touched it. Like, are you going to explode? Finally, he hopped up on the deer, and he started, feeding, getting in the rhythm, putting his head down and, to grab a bite, picking his head up to look around, putting his head back down. So finally, I told Kathy, next time, I was watching through a spotting scope, and Kathy had the remote control. I told Kathy, next time he puts his head down, turn the unit on. Then we'll wait. He'll pick his head up again. When he puts it down again, I'm going to tell you to fire. So we did that. We were both good that we were sure we were on the same page. He put his head down. I told her to turn the unit on, and the net went off. We both jumped, and she's like, I didn't do it. And there was a big cloud of smoke from the rockets, and that cleared, and I looked, relax, we caught him, he's under the net, uh-oh. I noticed there were flames. We didn't think of this, but it was, there's no snow at the time, and we started a grass fire with the rockets. It's like, we were already all worked up because we had just shot on an eagle. If you hunters know what buck fever is. You get that with an eagle too. The excitement when you're ready to throw the switch on an eagle is almost unbearable. It's just the adrenaline is flowing like you wouldn't believe. So it's a good thing adrenaline isn't flammable, or there would have been a mushroom over this capture site. But we got down there. In fact, Kathy's son, Michael, was with us at this time. The school bus had dropped him off at the car. And we got down to the site. Luckily, the wind was blowing away from the eagle, so the eagle was not in danger from the grass fire, but we did burn up the net, and the landowner came running down with a fire extinguisher, and I ended up owing the landowner a new fire extinguisher. Bought him a new fire extinguisher. And after that, we always made sure for any rocket netting activity, we had a fire extinguisher handy. But anyway, long story, we got the bird. He wasn't banded. We figured, okay, this is a bird that's going to get a transmitter. We put the transmitter on him. By then it was pretty much dark. We released him, and he went all the way to Sullivan County, the next county downstream, and started nesting there. So we were hoping to get a migrant, but we got a local bird. And I think we named him Scorch. We usually didn't name our birds, but we started calling him Scorch. And you can see the dark feathers in his head. He was just a 5-year-old bird too. Here, this was another year. This is Pete's Tech John Brennan for the Upper Delaware study. He hired a seasonal technician every winter just to work on the eagles. It was great work for a seasonal technician. John was a fellow Coblesko graduate, and I believe, last I heard, he's out in Minnesota working on the wolves in Minnesota right now. But here we are getting the bird all transmitted. And that's the bird. You can see on these satellite transmitters, there's a long antenna on them. The new cell phone transmitters do not have an external antenna like that. And we have the hood on the bird. Here's another one we caught that year. This particular one gave us a fright. I think this is the bird. There's always a risk when you use rocket nets or any other trapping technique for wildlife. There's always a risk. You do everything you can to minimize the risk to the bird. And with these rocket nets, there's actually there's human safety issues as well. They can certainly kill you if there's an accident. I know one person who is mainly deaf in one ear because a rocket net was set off prematurely while he was too close to it. So you do everything very carefully. And I was very fortunate throughout my whole career of rocket netting geese and turkeys and eagles that I never seriously injured or killed a bird. And I'm very, very thankful for that. But this particular bird was under the net and I went to retrieve it from the net, and it struck at me with its talons. But because of the motion of its talons was interrupted by the net material itself, the talons swung over, and it put the hallux talon right through its cheek, and then locked down. I couldn't open it up. So what I decided to do, I put it in the crate. We put it in the crate. We were both Kathy and I were pretty much freaking out over this, and we were going to take it to a wildlife rehabilitator. But by the time we were getting ready to leave, after getting all our stuff together, I opened up the crate to take a look, and while it was in the crate, it relaxed and let itself go. So I called up Pete and told Pete the story. So it's probably not a big deal. Just go ahead and put the transmitter on and release it. And that's good advice. You got to realize these birds are eating fish. Fish have all kinds of sharp rays on them and sharp bones and whatever. So puncture wounds on eagles are probably a pretty common thing. We put the transmitter on this bird, and it provided data, plenty of data for a long time after this. So the injury was not severe, thankfully. But in this particular bird, look how it's looking at me. Kind of like it's trying to decide whether it knows me or not. Well, guess what? It's not the first time it met me. Here it is in the nest. The nest was about a mile from the trap site when I banded it when it was 3 weeks old, 3.5 weeks old. Same bird. So, yeah, it did know me before. And here, just before 5 years later, I caught it again and put a transmitter on it. For this year, we were hoping to get local birds, trying to study the local birds in the area, the resident birds, I should say. Here is a ECO Vern Bauer. Vern is a falconer, and he's a good luck charm. He likes to, join wildlife staff when they're doing capture attempts, whether it be turkeys or, eagles or whatever. And he just seems to be charmed. Vern shows up, gets in the blind, and then a half hour later you take a shot. And that was what happened here. Vern showed up midday, got in the vehicle, we started swapping stories, and the bird showed up, and this is the one we caught that day. And guess what? It wasn't the first time I'd seen this bird either. It was one of these two chicks in the nest here, which we've seen in another presentation, from a nest about 25 miles away as the crow flies, or as the eagle flies, if you will. So I knew this bird. Here's a map Pete put together for the Journey North website in 2001. Each one of those colored dots is a different eagle that's been transmitted in New York State during the trapping studies. This was before the one I got too involved with, but you can see how these eagles travel far and wide. Some of our migrants go way up into northwestern Ontario, way up into Quebec, up into Labrador. They go right up into the tundra sometimes to nest. And we would have been really hard to know all that without this wonderful transmitter telemetry technology. Here are the first cell phone units we used. What had happened to Pete retired in, I think it was 2011. And after Pete retired, for a few years, there was very little eagle trapping in New York. He was the driving force behind the eagle program, and he left a huge vacuum when he left. There was a little bit going on in Region 8 for a while, unsuccessfully for a while. But in the fall of 2014, Tom Sallow from the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society, our local Audubon group here, called me up and asked me if I would be willing to trap golden eagles that winter. What it was, I think starting the winter before, in conjunction with the Katzner lab. Todd Katzner is a biologist, was with West Virginia University at the time. Now he's with the U.S. Geologic Survey in Boise, Idaho. But anyway, they were doing a project with citizens trying to assess golden eagles, the population and their movements on the East Coast, on the eastern seaboard, where the golden eagle is endangered. And they're doing that by putting out bait in specific type sites. They had a whole list of criteria of what made a good site. And they're putting a game camera on the bait so they could record, get photos of the golden eagles that showed up. And PhD students would assess the plumage to identify each individual bird, and they could, they ended up generating a lot of data that way. Wildlife staff people from the various states and groups like the Audubon Society would run and do all the work at these bait sites, and it was a real interesting study. Unfortunately, DEC wasn't involved in that. Basically, golden eagles for the DEC have kind of always been an afterthought until this time, except for A00. I think 4 other golden eagles were caught during bald eagle studies. It was just incidental capture on the bald eagle studies. A00, I believe, was the first one caught specifically trying to catch golden eagles. And then jump ahead to this study. They had the birds coming into bait through the camera study, and they wanted to get some transmitters on the birds, in part because there were some proposed wind power developments in the area, and they wanted to get some data to use to make sure that these windmills were properly sited, because they can kill birds. People associated with Todd Katzner's group started the company making these transmitters. In fact, Todd was involved with these transmitters, and they're really good. What they do, they take the location data, the GPS data, and they also will take the elevation the bird is at. If the bird is flying, that will be recorded, as well as the speed the eagle is flying. And PhD modelers were able to use all the data generated through these transmitters used throughout the eastern golden eagle range, and they figured what they came up with was they determined that just moving a proposed windmill tower 50 feet one way or the other could make the difference as to whether it was an eagle killer or not. Pretty amazing stuff, and all that kind of stuff was way above me. It would just be going to be my job, because I was already licensed for trapping eagles, and I was local, that they were going to be hoping to use me as a trapper. Barring that, if I had refused them or couldn't do it, they were going to use West Virginia University staff, and they were going to have to, give them room and lodging and everything. It was going to be a much bigger bite for the local Audubon Society. But they approached me, and I thought, sure, that sounds like a great thing, but I have to get permission. And for my immediate supervisors in Region 4, they thought it was great too. We don't understand a lot about the golden eagles we have. This is a great opportunity to get some data, and Delaware Otsego Audubon was going to do all the work except for on trap day when I showed up. And our regional wildlife manager at the time said, well, I better get permission from central office. And they said, no, nothing doing. I was like, whoa, that was a big surprise. Finally, we worked on them a bit. The regional wildlife manager worked on them a bit. Finally, they said, okay, you can do it, but DEC is not taking ownership of this. This is a Audubon Society baby. They own it. And I have some guesses, some speculation as why they were so reluctant to do this, to allow this. But ultimately, we did get the green light. It was very late in the game when we finally got the green light. And the Audubon Society, Delaware Audubon Society, was great. They did some emergency fundraising. Their members dug in deep, and they bought 4 of these transmitters, which are very, very pricey. They bought the capture system we use, which is like a mini rocket net, and I'll show you that in a minute. It's more of a one bird capture system, and you know, the hoods for the birds and things like that. It was just amazing how it all came together. And we're getting real close to the time we're going to go live. And I took delivery of the capture net and gave it a practice shot. And oh boy, scratching my head. It took a lot of shots. I had to fine tune it and modify it and stuff, get it where it was flying properly and get it where I was happy with it, where I'd feel comfortable using it on a bird. That took time. And then word came down that I wasn't licensed to use it. Here I was licensed to use this rocket net with 60 pounds of rockets on it, and you know, all kinds of noise and explosive charges and whatever. And this little pop gun we were going to use, which the charges were 22 blanks, like construction workers use to drive nails, just little pop guns with retriever training dummies as projectiles, you know, padded and everything. I had to be trained before the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would license me to do this. And in addition to that, I learned that they wanted blood from every eagle we caught. And while I had seen this done and maybe even drawn a little bit of blood myself on eagles, I wasn't licensed to do it. And to make matters worse, our governor at the time, in a cost-cutting measure, had banned all out-of-state travel. Couldn't do it. I couldn't get permission to go out of state. That the whole it's Eastern Golden Eagle Working Group was getting together right before the trapping season down in West Virginia, and they had it set up so they were paying for the room, the board, the meals, everything, and I couldn't get permission to go. So I finally just said, to heck with it. I'm going to take vacation time and I'm going to go down. It was a good thing I did, because I learned so much. And you know, I demonstrated that I could use the net. I fired it for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guy and got licensed to draw blood and to use the new net launcher. And in addition, I learned how to put these transmitters on. They go on with a different system, a different technique than I had learned from Pete. And the technique was really slick, but I'd never used it before. So everything was new. Everything was new in 2014. I hadn't trapped an eagle in 4 years or so. And all of a sudden, as we were getting close, after getting everything ready to go, I realized in the past, I was always working under Pete. Even if he wasn't physically there, he was always just a phone call away. Now I realized I'm in charge. And it was exciting and daunting as well. A pretty stressful time getting all this together. And here, the golden eagle trapping, there were some differences between the golden eagle trapping and the bald eagle. The site specifications for this golden eagle study were small forest openings on hilltops. Golden eagles tend to be much more wary of people than a lot of the bald eagles, and they figured it'd be most effective with these small forest openings, put the bait in the small forest openings. And on the hilltops in Delaware County, you're not getting there with a vehicle. We would use sleds and haul the stuff up and have to have a blind. If you look closely, it's a dark picture, but you can see the camouflage hunting blind. That's where I spent my day. A lot different than sitting in a vehicle all day. And those were the blinds we used, and watch the goings on in the bait. At this particular site in Delaware County, we had some good golden eagle activity, and so we're very hopeful when I showed up for the first trap day. Well, it took, and this was another winter where almost every trap day was below 0 Fahrenheit to start out with, pretty chilly stuff. But I was in this blind for 4 days. A lot of ravens came in, quite a number of bald eagles, which helped the day go a lot quicker, but no golden eagles. Finally, on the 5th day, it was before the sun came up, real early. The bird came in. Everybody shut up. There were ravens and bald eagles around making some noise. Anytime there's a raven around, it's making noise, it seems. And when you have 30 of them around, it sounds like the Serengeti. They all have a variety of calls, and really quite interesting just listening to all the various calls of the ravens. But all of a sudden, everybody shut up, and a big bird landed in the branch above the bait. And I looked out. It was just a silhouette. I couldn't see any markings or anything. So that outline is different. That is not a bald eagle, but that's a big bird, and boy, it looks more primordial than a bald eagle. You know, big body, but the head's smaller. It's moving its head in a different fashion, and it stayed up above the bait for a few minutes and then flew down to the bait. And I see, oh, it is a golden eagle. Great, we're in business. It got into its rhythm of feeding, got positioned right. With this little pop net, you want to position just right to make sure you catch them. It got in position where I wanted. I threw the switch and I caught it. Yay! I was alone at the time, and I went running out to get it. Whoops, I got ahead of myself there. Sorry. And I'm going backwards. Well, anyway, here's a shot zoomed up of the net box. This is at the second site nearby that first one where I first caught that golden eagle. And that shows the little net box. Each one of those round things you see just to the right of the bald eagle are the projectiles, which are training dummies for retrieving dogs. They're padded, they're very light. You know, you could hit somebody over the head with them and they barely know you did it. Having said that, you wouldn't want one of these going off while you're standing right in front of the net because it probably have enough force to kill you, but the energy is dissipated very quickly. But you still have to make sure all the birds are in a good position. Actually, I learned, as you'll see here in a bit, you just want one bird there in a good position before you touch it off. And if you also notice, you can see the game camera there above the bald eagle's head. And throughout this study there in Delaware County, numerous bald eagles came in, and those blackbirds are ravens. And we had for a while, we had a goshawk, which was also king of the bait until a golden eagle showed up. But it was, I got entertained a lot in between, you know, the golden eagle visits. But sometimes, especially at some of the other sites, you could go from sunrise to sunset without any activity on the bait at all. Those are real long days. And if you're by yourself, as I often was, I got to know myself really well. Didn't get into too many fights with myself, luckily, but hey, that's another story. Here's a shot of an immature bald eagle. You really had to know your stuff, your eagle ID. A lot of these immature eagles, you could, if your mind is playing tricks on you, you could turn them into golden eagles pretty quick. If you could mistake a rough-legged hawk for a golden eagle, you could probably do one of these immature balds without too much trouble if you're not really paying attention. So I pay attention. This is an immature bald, so I just watch it eat. Here's another immature bald. This one always gave me a start when it came in because those white feathers on the head in different lighting conditions almost looks like a golden eagle. So, you know, for a half second or whatever, my heart rate would start increasing when this bird showed up. But then it's just it again. Oh well. Sometimes, I mean, right here, these are peaceful scenes. Sometimes these bald eagles would just kick the snot out of each other. I would hear physical thumps as their bodies came together as they fought over the food. That's one of the reasons why we strongly discourage private people from doing this, either, you know, to get pictures in their own game cameras or with their cameras. If a deer dies out on the landscape for whatever reason, it's going to get cleaned up pretty quick. You know, the birds find it. Here at these bait sites, we kept them in bait all season long, and the birds get used to them there, so they congregate in much greater numbers than they would normally in the wild. And it does result in, you know, a lot of skirmishing and stuff. And if there were a disease that communicable disease that would affect the birds, and there are some out there. Luckily, none too serious in New York that I know of at the moment, but in a situation like this where you have big congregation of birds, if one of them is sick, it can spread a disease quite readily. For this and other reasons, it's just not how nature works. We strongly discourage the feeding of eagles by private individuals. And furthermore, if one of these deer had been shot with a lead projectile, it could end up poisoning a lot of eagles in a situation like this. So just please don't do any private feeding on your own. Oh, here's a skirmish right here. A couple eagles getting at it. Here's 3 adult eagles together, probably in between skirmishes if I remember right. But at this time, I'm trying to catch golden eagles, so the bald eagle's got to pass. There's the 3 again. And here, this is fast forward. This was the last year of the study. We started in 2014. This was the last year of my career, I should say. I did trap for them after I retired in 2017 as well. This was 2016, and I went through my whole career using rocket nets and this little net launcher as well, without ever having the net fail to go off and without ever failing to catch at least a bird. With a rocket net, we might shoot on multiple birds and not catch every single one of them. But I never had an issue. And this particular year, 2016, we had 4 transmitters to get out. And I think I had placed 1 or 2 transmitters successfully. And then we had like 4 or 5 consecutive trap days ruined by things going wrong. And this was one of them. And this was the one where I just, it's early morning. I'm getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get up and out into the trap site and get things set up before daylight. And there's a little switch on the batteries inside for the receiver inside the net itself for the launching mechanism. And you don't want to turn that on until everything's set up, all the help is cleared out, and for safety reasons. And you don't want that net going off prematurely because it'll ruin your day. Well, I forgot to turn it on. So here I spent some time in the blind waiting for a gold eagle to show up. One finally showed up, got situated, got its head down properly right where I wanted it. I threw the switch and nothing happened. It's like a few choice 4-letter words went through my mind, I can guarantee you that. I waited again until it got in position, tried it again. Of course, nothing happened. The switch wasn't on at the net. Nothing I could do about it except take pictures of the golden eagle. You can see it's an immature golden eagle. Even the immatures have the golden feathers on the head there, but you see the white on the tail. The tail feathers are white with the black tips on the immature birds. And I'll show you some better pictures of that here coming up. And you can just make it out if you have a big screen. If you're looking on a smartphone or whatever, you don't see it, but the tarsus, the leg between the knee and the foot, is feathered right down to the top of the foot. After the bird left, I went out to the net launcher and saw what the problem was. We did end up catching this same bird, we think. I believe it was the next day. So it wasn't all lost, but it was certainly a disappointing day after all the effort of getting out there and trying to catch. Another shot of the immature golden eagle. Like I said, everybody clears out when a golden eagle shows up. It got to the point, my field of view was limited from this blind, but it would always sound like a zoo out there with the ravens, the crows, and the bald eagles calling back and forth. When a golden eagle showed up, even if I couldn't see it, I knew it was there. They usually landed in the trees first before they came down to the bait. Just everybody would shut up. And then they would come down to the bait and everybody would clear out. There wouldn't be anybody on the bait at all while the golden eagle was there for a while. Then the ravens would start filtering in, and they'd actually start pulling on the feathers, tail feathers and wing feathers on the bird. And they did this with the bald eagles all the time too. And I think their strategy was, just keep harassing the bird. So as soon as it fills its crop, it's going to leave. It doesn't want to sit there and be harassed. Otherwise, it might be there all day. And the strategy does seem to work, but you can also end up with a dead raven. We did have one get killed right beside me by that goshawk. Had enough of the ravens getting uppity, and it killed one. Okay, then we'll go back here to the first one I caught. This was the 5th day of the first year of the Golden Eagle project. Sun wasn't even up yet, and I get out to the net, and this beautiful immature Golden Eagle female is under the net. I was in radio contact with my ground crew, which was about, well, they're quite a ways away down at the landowner's house, holed up. And it was so early in the morning, they didn't think anything was going to happen. They didn't have their radio on yet. So I'm yelling into the radio. This bird is hopelessly tangled in the net. It turns out that this little net isn't like a rocket net where they get trapped under the net. What it relies on is a whole bunch of slack in the net, creates a bag, and they get hopelessly tangled in the net and in that bag and don't get away. But it's also very difficult to get them out. And I was trying on my own and on my own. Nobody was answering the radio. I was getting pretty frustrated. Finally, they turned on their radio, and I got a hold of them. And it's like, what? You got a bird? After 5 days, 5 full days of nothing happening, here they didn't even have their coffee yet, and we had a bird under the net. And there we finally got it out of the net. A good backstory to this bird, not a good backstory to this bird, a very concerning backstory to this bird, which I will tell you in my next segment. But at this time, it was seemed to be healthy, immature female. You can see the talons there. Finally, all our efforts paid off. There's Peg Di Benedetto. She had been a volunteer with my office for 25 years at least before this picture is taken. I knew Peg well. We were good friends. And her husband, Michael, was involved with the project, and he's in some of these photos as well. And here we're rejoicing in a successful capture. This is a landowner. He was a retired high school teacher from the local school district, and we're going to put the bird in one of those hacking crates. Here's another shot from that year. This was the first eagle caught in Otsego County in modern times, I believe. This was not very far from my house at all, and not very far from Delaware Otsego project leader, Golden Eagle project leader Tom Salo's house. And there, this is the game camera getting a picture of Tom and I sprinting from the blind to the successfully captured eagle here. Tom won the sprint, and we got to the bird. And there he is. Delaware Otsego Audubon named all these birds. In DEC, we didn't name our captured birds, but that first bird we caught was Maxime. This is Greg, Otsego County, and you can see the empty net launcher behind me inside another box we put there, a dummy box to protect it and get the bird juice coming in. And this bird also was hopelessly tangled in the net. It's a job getting him out. Here's Michael Di Benedetto and I taking one out at another one of the Delaware County sites. Game camera picture. You can get if you look really closely there, you can see those talons. They just, and the golden eagles just, man, the bald eagles, they're wow. On the golden eagles, they're wow on steroids. You don't want those sticking in you. I did fast forward. Up until this Golden Eagle project, I had never lost any blood working with these adult eagles. In the nest, yeah, the youngsters would get you with their talons or bite you a little bit, and it was like a briar scratch. Nothing to worry about. But here with the Golden Eagle project, our hoods didn't always fit them so well. There's a wide variety of head sizes on them, and our hoods on hand left a little to be desired sometime. And it was Greg, that last Otsego County bird, I believe it was. I was working on him, all excited. My heart's beating because working on an eagle. We just captured an eagle, and I'm working on him. and had the hood on him, but it didn't fit really well, and you could see a little bit underneath it. And he bit my hand, bit my finger. My finger started bleeding, and because my heart was pumping from the excitement so bad, it wasn't stopping right away. I'm not worried. I'm a flint napper. I chip flint and stuff into stone arrowheads and knife blades, and I cut myself frequently, so I wasn't too worried about the blood. But it was kind of hard to process the bird. I need all my fingers, and I need them all working, and blood is slippery, and I had to get the blood stopped before I continued to process the bird. So finally got the blood stopped, and I started working on him again, doing something else, and he saw me, and he got me with his hallux talon and another finger. Luckily, he didn't clamp his whole fist down on me, but I did draw blood again, and I had to stop what I was doing and get the bleeding stopped again. So his feisty actions kept him in our hands an extra half hour while I got the blood flow staunched on me so I could continue processing the bird. But those are about the extent of my war wounds for working with the eagles, luckily. Getting these Goldens processed, for me, this is a whole new process of putting on the transmitter than what I was used to. And even with that, I was rusty with that because I hadn't put one on for 4 years or so. And I had this new system, which made a lot of sense, but I still had to make sure it was just right. And because I was working for a bunch of PhDs, the West Virginia folks wanted a bunch more measurements than I was used to taking for the DEC. A considerable number of measurements on the bald eagles for the DEC, but for these golden eagles, they wanted measurements I'd never even heard of before. So the processing was quite a thing. And in addition to this first bird, we took it into the landowner's garage down in town, a little village in Delaware County. And somehow I think word got out by cell phone or whatever. And pretty much the whole community and every visitor within, 30 miles plus Delaware Otsego Audubon members were there, and we had a crowd. And the project leaders in West Virginia saw pictures of that, and they got really upset, and probably rightly so. So we changed our method of doing things. But here on some of these pictures, you're going to see a lot of people around. And I kind of figure when you're handling a bird like this, it is so stressful for the bird. I mean, there's a maximum amount of stress. I tend to think having more people around isn't really so bad. That's just my feelings. But in this case, we certainly deferred to the experts, who I will say have caught many, many, many more golden eagles than I ever did. And so after that, we were aware of that, and we kept things a little more reasonable. Here's the landowner holding the bird while I'm processing it. Measuring the skull length there. That's a Delaware Otsego Audubon member, Becky Gretton, in the background. I'm going to use some of her photos. This was a different golden we caught. We weighed them all in kilograms. There's Michael DiBenedetto taking the picture, his wife Peg holding the bird, and Mike Clark, who is now the Region 4 wildlife manager, and hired me back to work those 2 years as a seasonal in 2017 and 2018. And Mike was previously employed by Pete as a seasonal and already had a fair amount of eagle experience. And he's also a SUNY Cobblesco graduate. I'll put a plug in for my alma mater there. And here I was, Mike came along to get a little extra experience so he could get his license to do all this kind of stuff as well. So as my career was fading into the sunset, we were making sure there was a staff left behind who could do the work. So right now it is Mike and Region 9's new wildlife manager, Ann Rothrock, who we'll see in a bit. Here I'm measuring a part of the wing. I don't remember exactly which part there, or whatever, but I took a bunch of measurements for this project on each bird, working on sewing the transmitter on. These transmitters do go on both in the old style and the new style. It's a backpack arrangement where there are straps coming off all four corners of the transmitter, and they meet on the keel or the breastbone in the proper place, and they're sewn together there put the transmitter on. On this new method that I was using with these transmitters, there's also some sewing to do at the transmitter. And you got to make sure everything is just right. Working with this Teflon harness material, it's a ribbon material, it's really difficult because, like I said, it's nylon and Teflon coated, and it's slippery as all get out. It's hard to get everything just right. It really takes some finagling around. Hey, if you notice in George's hand there, once we're done doing any measurements we need to on the feet, we wrap the feet with vet tape, or we had special booties too, just for this type of work, to make sure those talons are put out of action. Checking the fit of the transmitter there. Getting it just right. Still working on it. And with this new method of putting them on, with the old method, one of the disadvantages of it, you just put it on, get it fit as best you can, sew it up, and do the final stitching, and you're done. With the new method, you can work it into the feathers, and then you take the bird out, let the bird flap its wings a few times, turn it upside down, let it flap some more, and then you check the fit again. And what that does, it works the ribbon down into the feathers, and you get it's easier to get a more precise fit with it, and that's one of the reasons we went to this method. And that's what Mike is doing there. I've gotten the transmitter where I'm pretty happy with the fit, so it's okay, Mike, go out and let the bird flap around a bit, and we'll check it after all that. And finally, once you're sure the transmitter is fit properly, you tie knots at the transmitter and secure the knots with sewing. With this first bird, we're going back to Maxime here. Maxime, the first bird, I hadn't sewn a stitch in 4 years when I did my last bald eagle, and never was a very good seamstress, if you will. This is my dental hygienist, Becky, who is the wife of one of the bait site attendants, and she has a fair hand at sewing, so she finished off the stitching for me. Thank you, Becky. I got to the point where I could sew without being just all thumbs, and I could do the job quite well after that first bird. Checking the fit again on another bird. We did end up catching 8 birds during this project between 2014 and 2017. So we were very successful, and these are pictures from all of them. Golden eagles can be aged by their feathers up till they're about 7 years of age. Was never very experienced at that. It gets pretty complicated. So what we did, we would take pictures of the wings and the tail for the West Virginia folks to look at, to age the birds. This one we knew it was an immature bird because of the tail feathers and the white feathers on the wing, but we still went through the process of taking all the pictures. And you can see some of the crowd that came along. This is a first-year bird here. A lot of white in the tail, white in the wings and stuff. And that's Tom Sallow, the project leader, on the left. Mike DiBenedetto and myself holding the bird up for the pictures. Here, Bernadette Winter Riley, I believe, if I remember her name correctly, a Cobleskill student at the time. She's since graduated, and I believe working in the field in another state now, but she got to go along for a day, and luckily we caught a golden eagle that day to give her a thrill. And she's holding the tail open. It shows, a classic young golden eagle tail there. That's what the Sioux warriors liked in their headdress. And there's an older, but not a mature bird, but an older than first year bird, still showing a lot of white in the tail feathers, but it's not a young of the year bird. And there is a mature golden eagle. And the different color feathers are the real dark shiny ones, like the one on the far right is a newer feather, still nice and shiny and black. the lighter tan feathers are faded like a pair of jeans. And the sequence of that fading on both the wing primary feathers and the tail feathers is how somebody knows how to do it, ages these older birds out to 7 years. Like I said, after 7 years, it's like a mature bald eagle. You don't know if it hasn't been banded during a known age year. Here's the underwings of an immature bird. They got those definitive white patches under the wing there, which aren't so white on the older golden eagles. But if you see an eagle gliding overhead with a bright white patch in those locations, it's probably a golden. Although you can be fooled with some of the balds. And there's a close-up shot of the talons, foot and talons on one of these golden eagles. You don't want those sticking in you. And just like with the bald eagles, when we were all done, we wanted to be rewarded with a photo opportunity before the bird was released. Here, I don't know who's imitating who. Looks like either I'm trying to imitate the golden eagle or golden eagle's trying to imitate me, but like I said, in the sunshine, these gold feathers on the head are a real sight to behold. Happy crew. Our work is done for the day. Nothing left to do except let the bird go. Here's a crew for one bird. This is people we've already met, except on the right is Abby Nelson, who was a student at Hartwick College, local private college that actually Tom Sala was an alma mater with. And they did some of the number crunching and work on the data with these golden eagles to assist for school projects. And Abby got my favorite picture from my career, which is coming right up here. Before we go there, the West Virginia folks said, before you release the birds, go ahead and feed them. Feed them some venison. You've interrupted their day. They came in to fill their crop, and they're going to leave with their crop empty if you don't feed them. So they suggested we try it, and sure enough, it works. I'd never done this with a bald eagle, but you could put food up to their beak there, and they would gobble it down. Pretty interesting stuff. Here, I'm going to release this bird in a sequence of pictures. Up and away. And there's Abby's shot, which I just love. I'm releasing that great big female golden eagle after handling. You can see the sun's getting low in the sky, but it was interesting when this bird got across the valley, just a ton of ravens rose up to meet it and called like crazy. They're all agitated and they wanted to chase this right out of here. I guess that's where all the ravens are roosting after feeding on the bait site until we disturbed it with shooting the net off, no doubt. But it was really quite a sight to see from a distance, just like a cloud of ravens rising up to meet this golden eagle coming towards them. Something I know the five of us will remember for the rest of our days. Also at this time here, when I got the green light to go ahead with this golden eagle project in 2014, it turns out I wasn't done with the bald eagle trapping either. For a few years, Blanche Town, who I mentioned before, she was a technician who had trapped eagles up in Region 6, up in the St. Lawrence Valley. And Pete had been going out to Region 9, extreme western New York, to try to help them catch a bald eagle, or bald eagles to put transmitters on, because they had some proposed wind power projects, and they wanted to get some data on these eagle movements to hopefully protect their resident nesting bald eagles. And they'd had a number of problems in prior years to 2014, and were not successful. Blanche contacted me before the trapping season and asked me if I would be willing to help out. Maybe between the two of us, we could finally catch an eagle out there. And in addition to that, a new staff member took over the duties out there because of the retirement of the fellow handling it before, and that was Ann Rothrock. So I agreed to go, and Blanche laid down the law, said, we will come out and help, but we're going to do it this way, this way, this way. And Ann was perfectly fine with that. She was just happy to have us out there and hoping to be able to learn some stuff from us. And our very first day out there this winter, I brought the Delaware-Otsego County net launcher, which until then we'd only used to try to catch a single bird at a time, which we thought was what would happen here in Region 9. And we showed up on this site, which was just a very short distance from Lake Erie, about as far west in New York as you could get without getting your feet wet in the Great Lakes. And Blanche and I were in the blind. There's no place for a vehicle blind here. Blanche and I were in the pop-up blind, the tent blind, and Ann and staff were in vehicles waiting nearby. And 2 adult eagles came in, and we shot the net. This is right as the net was going over them. You can't see it too well. This is a game camera shot. And the eagle on the right is actually pulling the net away from the eagle on the left, who escaped. We did catch the eagle on the right, and the eagle on the left escaped. And it turns out this little pop net is not suitable for multiple birds. It's only good for one bird. So that's the last time we use this net in Region 9, just for that reason. Because if they caught both these birds, Ann did have multiple transmitters, and this is very close to one of her nests, very close to a proposed wind power project. Would have been nice to catch both those birds, and with a rocket net we would have. So lesson learned. Oh, there's a shot of the net after we caught the one bird there and the other one got away. This was from the game camera. And there's a happy crew with a game camera after we processed the bird. Take that back. We caught that bird in the afternoon. That's right. So we ended up, by the time we got this bird all processed and ready to go, it was well after dark. So we held it overnight to release the next day. And that's the happy Region 9 crew with Ann behind my right shoulder, and that's Blanche from Region 6 behind my left shoulder, and Jolene, the seasonal technician, next to us, and Greg on the right, who was a technician at the time. He's now a biologist in Region 9, and like I mentioned before, Ann is now the new Region 9 wildlife manager. So congratulations, guys, on your promotion. And Blanche behind me there has retired as well. She retired just shortly after I did. And that bird, last I heard last year anyway, is still around. Unfortunately, the transmitter, which is a different brand than I had been using out in for the golden eagles, didn't last very long. So it was a dud in that regard. But we finally broke the ice and caught an eagle. It was the first of several out in Region 9. This is, flash forward a couple years, this was 2016, so this was 2 years later from that last set. Blanche had retired. Ann wasn't fully licensed to do this yet. She still needed some experience on her resume to get licensed to do all this work with eagles from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So she asked me to come out and assist, and so I did. And on this day, I decided, okay, Ann, if an eagle shows up, it's all up to you. You're trained enough. You need the experience. You call the shot. You pull the switch. You do everything. I'll just be here as the licensed trapper, and I'll interject if I need to. But sure enough, bald eagle showed up, went on the bait, and Ann and I were both nervous as heck, but she did what she had to. She handled it beautifully. She picked the shot beautifully, checked just to make sure I agreed it was okay, and pulled the switch, and here's a game camera shot of what we caught that day. And here we are after getting the bird out of the net. A happy and relieved Ann, calming down after all the excitement of the trap morning, and I may look cool and suave and debonair there too, but I'm also a nervous wreck after the proceedings, but a very happy nervous wreck, and very glad and got the confidence to realize that, hey, I'm an eagle trapper now. But it wasn't the end of the excitement for the day. Region 9 had a facility just a few miles from the trap site here, indoor facility where Ann wanted to process the birds rather than out in the weather. So we crated this bird up and brought it to, hopefully we're trying to get to the facility to ban the bird. And right in the city of Dunkirk, my longtime state vehicle gave up the ghost. It was the end of its life. The oil line burst and end of vehicle. And it happened 300 miles from home. So here's the police pushing me out of traffic, and Ann gave me a ride to we called up operations to tow the heap away. We processed the bird. Ann gave me a ride to the processing facility. We processed the bird. And why do I have an eagle on my lap? Because it's too dangerous to drive with an eagle lap on your lap, stupid. Nah, I'm just kidding. We figured since my hands were free, I didn't have to drive anymore. I couldn't drive. I didn't have a vehicle. Rather than put the bird back in the crate and harass it that way, we would ride to the release site after processing with a hooded eagle. And that's why the bird is on my lap. And you know, it worked, and I had to borrow a vehicle and found a Region 9 vehicle for me to take back to Region 4, because that was a good thing, because the next morning I was on the schedule to trap golden eagles, so I didn't need a vehicle. And I finished out my career. This was 2 or 3 months before I retired. I finished out my career without a vehicle assigned to me. I had to beg, steal, or borrow every day I had to go to the field. But that's okay. All right. I think I've pretty much covered everything with our trapping program. I probably forgot a story or two or a detail that I should convey. But I've been talking a long time, and this bird here was the last eagle I caught during my regular career in 2016. I did catch more as a volunteer or seasonal for a couple years after this. But this one, I did not catch with a rocket net or our net launcher. I caught this one with a landing net, a fishing landing net, you know, a net you would use to net a big fish you would catch. And it didn't happen because I learned how to be a great eagle trapper, that I could catch them with a hand net like that. There's a not too pleasant story involved with this and a lot of other birds that I handled in my career, and I'm going to talk about that in the next segment, which will deal primarily with eagles getting themselves in trouble or ending up in trouble for one way or another, and have a lot of experience with that and a lot to say about that as well. But for today, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we will call it a wrap on the eagle capture in my career here.